Today, I am going to be talking about the path of accumulation. I will be giving a series of talks on the 5 paths, and today is the day to start with the first path, the path of accumulation. The whole idea of a path is extremely important in Buddhism for the very simple reason that we are not relying on the power of another person for us to reach the goal. It is up to ourselves, our capacity, you might say enthusiasm and effort and so forth to attain liberation. We have Buddha nature, so there is the path that the Buddha laid out that we travel to attain liberation. And this path is a firsthand experience. It's not something that you can hear about or read about, and then no problem. We each have to travel the path ourselves. And it's about transformation. And this is where impermanence comes in as a very important factor. If it weren't for impermanence, we couldn't transform. But because of impermanence, we can change and transform and become totally, fully enlightened Buddhas. The teachings are like a travel guide. And the teacher, if we are fortunate, is a bodhisattva who has traveled the path and therefore can guide us, can be an excellent guide because a bodhisattva has already traveled these paths. Also, a bodhisattva will know you personally once you become the student of a bodhisattva. And of course, I am specifically thinking about Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche when I say this, that he knew his students personally. And this type of guru or lama is very important, and it's important to follow their guidance. So the question is, if there is no substantial, permanent, independent, inherently self-existing self, who travels the path? This might sound like an oxymoron, a conundrum, or whatever. First of all, if you have that attitude, it's nihilistic to say that we don't exist. What we do as we travel the path is we come to know more about ourselves. The path is about transformation, as I said. And as we travel, we see more of our confusion, our kleshas, our habitual patterns, our faults. We also can see our qualities and so forth. We get to know ourselves very, very well. And we gain insight into our very nature. And this insight is a little different than wisdom. That comes later. But in the beginning, it is insight that we gain. And we develop on the path through listening, hearing, contemplation, and practice. All of these are very important aspects of what we need to do to travel the path and transform. Now, there are 2 different ways to travel the path. The first is Shravaka approach, the other is the Bodhisattva approach. And I'm going to talk about both of them here. Both of these are considered valid motivations. Tibetan Buddhism stresses the Bodhisattva approach. The Shravaka motivation is to attain enlightenment for one's own sake, that you are concerned about eliminating your own suffering and pain. The Bodhisattva's motivation is they are working for the liberation of others and attaining enlightenment for others as well as themselves. There are 3 types of motivation for a bodhisattva that are worth looking into here. The first is called king-like. What that means is that a king, before he becomes king, trains in various skills that a king will need, become educated in what is needed to be head of state, to govern. In the old times, a king would also have trained in being a warrior and There would be other things that a king would train in. A king to be would need to have money, a good treasury, would need to have, you might say, a retinue of other people that could come in and help him govern. So this king-like motivation is that you work on developing yourself so that you are ready to become a Buddha and lead all beings to liberation. So you're putting yourself in front, but you're doing it for the benefit of all. So this is considered valid motivation for a bodhisattva. The next is boatman-like. And this type of motivation is compared to a boatman that carries people in his boat from one side of a river to the other side. And when you go from one side to the other, there's only so many people that can fit in your boat. And so you take a few people with you to the other side as you attain enlightenment. The third is shepherd-like. The idea here is that a shepherd is leading, and I'm saying that in quotes, sheep in a certain direction. But the way a shepherd leads sheep is they walk behind them and drive them forward. And the sheep are constantly going to the right, going to the left, not following each other in a herd. It's a bit like herding cats. So the shepherd-like motivation is that the individual is paying very close attention to others, and he wants them to become enlightened before he or she becomes enlightened. It is said that this type of motivation leads to becoming a Buddha most quickly, but it also is the hardest to have and maintain. But these three motivations are the way that Bodhisattva motivation is described. There are a total of 5 paths, and I'm talking about the first one, which is the path of accumulation. The next path is the path of junction or application. Then there is the path of seeing. The fourth is the path of meditation, and the fifth is the path of no more learning. The first 2 paths are operating in the context of samsara. They are considered worldly paths. And the last 3 are when you get the experience, have the experience of egolessness, emptiness. These are not of the world. These are more of a spiritual nature. They are considered super mundane paths, and the first 2 are considered worldly paths. There's a greater accumulation of wisdom when you are on these super mundane paths, because again, you've had the experience of emptiness. It is not stable in the beginning, but you develop a tremendous amount of wisdom as you travel the path after having experienced emptiness. Now, for the Shravakas, wisdom means understanding impermanence. For the Bodhisattvas, it's this experience of emptiness. So that's an important distinction. Much of what I'm going to talk about now with the path of accumulation holds true for both the Shravakas and the Bodhisattva meditation and motivation. Now, you have to attain a certain level before you really know what it is like. It cannot be explained. You cannot read about it. It's all about experience. A bodhisattva that's on the path of meditation, they would not know exactly what it is like to be on the path of no more learning, which is complete Buddhahood. So the first path is the path of accumulation. And here we must recognize the conditions that we are living in and realize that your life is completely unsatisfactory and unfulfilling. If you don't realize this, what's the point of starting on the path? It's that simple. I came up with a couple of reasons for starting on the path, even though you do not feel that your life is completely unsatisfactory. And one would be, to use a modern term, you want to hack the system. You're dissatisfied, but you want to hack the system. Another reason could be to back up your ego, that you feeling kind of insecure, and somehow or another becoming a Buddhist gives you another, what would I say, a box to check. A third reason that I came up with would be kind of like insurance in case that you're wrong. So maybe Buddhism is right. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe when I die, it'll help me. But the problem with these is nothing is really being given up. There's no opening up to the Dharma or to the Lama. You're really just trying to take something that you will find useful and helpful. And of course, these strategies don't work. Here's a quote from Dharma Paths by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. If we are actually practicing the path of accumulation, we are quite advanced. We are not really beginners. This is an important point. So in order to develop this feeling of dissatisfaction for samsara, it requires some work in most cases, especially to focus our efforts and attention in the right direction. In order to be on the path of accumulation, you have to realize that samsara is a condition of the mind. It's not a solid place. And the samsaric mind is always busy. The samsaric mind suffers. It wants happiness, but it suffers. It finds suffering instead. It has cravings to experience happiness. This samsaric mind judges, experiences the kleshas like anger. And the more you see, the stronger the desire gets. And what a practitioner on this path sees is that temporal happiness is temporary. You don't reject happiness, but you realize it is temporary, that it is impermanent, that it's possible for it to end at any moment. This is a deep understanding of impermanence. If you haven't come to this understanding, then when things change, a divorce, for instance, losing a job, a death of somebody, all of this can be extremely difficult and painful. Being told of an incurable fatal disease, too, can be extremely painful if you don't really have this understanding that impermanence is always present. In a way, this is a definition of ignorance, and that is thinking that pleasant conditions are permanent or at least last as long as we want them to, which is basically permanent. You come to this path because you have developed an understanding that real happiness comes from within, that it does not come from external conditions. It's important to do as many virtuous actions of body, speech, and mind as possible. This is one reason why it's called the path of accumulation. We try to accumulate as much virtue and merit as we can. And when we engage in these actions, virtuous actions, this increases our faith, our devotion, and our diligence. These propel us on the path. They help us develop a deeper understanding and deeper realization, and our meditation becomes more stable. There are three parts to this path of accumulation: lesser, medium, and greater. And here is how this works. That the lesser path of accumulation, the student works on understanding the nature of things through logic, contemplation, and meditation, specifically shamatha meditation. The person or the student gains some understanding of how wild their mind is, filled with uncontrollable thoughts, emotions, fear, distortions. It's amazing how we are constantly embellishing things with our own judgments and so forth. We just have a glimpse of this, but the more we practice shamatha, this helps remedy this wild mind or this monkey mind. There also is Vipassana meditation. And very simply, this is a contemplation on the four foundations of mindfulness, examining the body, feelings and sensations, mind, and the external objects of mind. And this examination, again, this is Vipassana. It's not tranquility meditation. It's actually investigating. You're not even necessarily sitting on a cushion while you're doing this, but you are thinking about, you're examining over and over and over. We look at our body. This makes it very personal. Is there anything in our body that is permanent? So examine that question. Can you find anything that's permanent? Is there anything in the body that is existing independently? And you look at that and think about that and examine that. It doesn't work to say, well, of course, there's nothing that exists independently, because you're just parroting an answer. And then you go through your life acting like there is something that exists independently. Contemplate and examine, are you your body? And the conclusion, of course, is that our body is impermanent. Let go attachment to the body. If you're still attached to your body, you need to contemplate this more, because this is what the result of a good contemplation on the body will result in. You can also do this analysis by deconstructing the body into smaller and smaller parts. So our body is made of parts like hands, fingers, wrist, forearm, and so forth, through all the parts at that level. And then at a deeper level, it's made up of skin, bones, blood, muscle, tendons, cartilage, and on and on and on. And they are made up of smaller particles. You could call them cells if you like. And there's probably a category of things between things like muscle and tendons and blood and cells. I'm not sure what it is. It doesn't matter. And then from the cells, you can go into the chemicals. Exactly what is the components of blood, and then they're made out of molecules and atoms. And what are molecules and atoms made out of? They're subatomic particles. And then you get into physics, and modern physics says that you can't even find anything there. Probability that there's going to be something there, but then what is it? Then you've got string theory, and I don't understand that. But your body is basically reduced to not a whole lot. So that's another analysis. Traditionally, it would have been done, they would use the idea of what we would call an atom, and an atom would be a part that has no sides, top or bottom. In other words, it cannot be broken up into smaller parts. And this is just an intellectual exercise. But you come to the same conclusion, and that is that the body doesn't exist the way we think it is. The next is feelings and sensations. So contemplate, do pleasant feelings last? And do they come from within, or do they come from outer objects? Can pleasant feelings become unpleasant? Can you eat so much good food that you are overstuffed and it becomes painful, for instance? The next is, can friends become foe? A pleasant friend, can they become an enemy? So the conclusion here, after analysis, again, over and over again, until you really get it at a very deep level. You could say, take it into your experience. I think that's a good way to put it. Clinging to feelings cause suffering because they are impermanent. And this understanding helps let go of attachment to material possessions. It doesn't mean that you have to let go of material possessions, but just let go of the strong attachment to them. The third is mind, contemplating mind. This is consciousness. So look at your thoughts as they come and they go, both in meditation and also post-meditation. If you look carefully, you will notice that the thoughts come and then they go and then more come, that it's a constant stream of thoughts, but they're always new thoughts. It may seem like an old thought, but it arises fresh. It may be that your thoughts are like a soap opera and they're like reruns of a soap opera, but we actually generate them freshly. And the reason why they're reruns is that our habitual patterns cause us to keep creating the same thoughts over and over and over again. And the same thing with emotions and moods, because our emotions and our moods are very closely related to thoughts. And we have emotions that come and go, moods that come and go, but basically they're very similar. I like to explain there are considered 5 emotions: attachment, aversion, which leads to anger, attachment leads to greed, and desire, passion, and so forth leads to frustration, anger, hostility, ignorance, which is wanting to ignore it, pretend it isn't there. You might say there's an elephant in the room, but you don't see it. Then there is jealousy, where you feel other people have a better deal than you. And pride is that, of course, you've got the best deal of all. What we find if we look at ourselves and these 5 emotions is that there's one that we specialize in. It's our go-to emotion. That's where we spend most of our emotional time. And then there's another that we have a competency in, and we can always go there and feel pretty comfortable there too. And then the others, maybe not so much, but we can cycle through all of them and cycle through them very quickly. And moods are long-lasting and they're more subtle. Very simply, you can be in a good mood and then you seem to have thoughts that are more positive, and you're in a bad mood, and no matter what happens, you're still having negative thoughts. We also begin to get a glimpse of impermanence, how our thoughts don't last, our moods don't last, our emotions don't last. So we look, we observe, we analyze our mind. This is very different than shamatha, where we just, you might say, meditate and develop some tranquility. This is active looking at the mind. And then the objects of the mind, which is the 4th contemplation, we realize that all phenomena are impermanent and unreliable. Even mountains change. This area where I live, the bedrock underneath everything is sandstone. And the reason why there's sandstone here is that this used to be underwater, and it used to be salt water. It was connected to the Gulf of Mexico in this part of Wisconsin. And so there's a lot of sandstone underneath. What happened? There's a long way from the ocean now. And on the other hand, since I have a farm field here, on top of that sandstone is soil, and in the soil is full of rocks that are not sandstone. They probably came from a big hole that is now called Lake Superior, maybe even further north than that. I joke sometimes and say the rocks are imported because of the glacier, but it's impermanent. It's important, again, to realize this. The deeper your understanding of impermanence of phenomena, the easier it is for us to work with it in a sane manner. Again, the Vipassana meditation is very different from shamatha, and it has a different function. Vipassana is basically insight into the nature of things. Here is a quote from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. The aim of this meditation on impermanence is to free ourselves from attachment to our physical body, to our sensations, to the existence of the mind, and the existence of all objects of the mind. Now, ordinarily, impermanence is seen as a problem because our pleasant experiences don't last. But here, impermanence is seen as a positive. It means that we can change, we can transform, we can travel the path. And especially if you are suffering a lot, we can leave suffering behind. Now, that is the lesser path of accumulation. The next is the medium path of accumulation. And this is practicing the 4 abandonments. This is quite simple. We're trying to gain control over our negativities and trying to encourage our positive qualities. We try to avoid engaging in negative behavior, and we try to keep it from arising in the future. Gaining control of our mind, which is, of course, what causes our actions of body, speech, and mind. So very simply, it's gaining control of our negativities, working so that we can keep them from arising in the future, encouraging positive qualities and behavior, and developing new qualities and behavior. Those are the 4 abandonments. There's also a very strong relationship between morality and well-being, but it's perhaps not the way you think about it or is ordinarily taught, that we engage in positive actions because they lead to physical and mental well-being. So morality actually is very beneficial for our physical and mental well-being. We are mindful and observe our body, speech, and mind, and we can see this. We can see that positivity leads to happiness and well-being, and that negativity leads to anxiety, agitation, fear, and more negativity. I will say this, that frequently it's easier to see this in other people, especially the negativity. We don't see our own negativity, but another person's just jumps out at us. What that means is now it's time to look inward. And it's interesting. It seems like the faults in another person that irritate us the most are a fault that we have too. So if someone really irritates you, that's really a good time to take a time out and look deeply. And do I ever do that? Again, this requires mindfulness, and it requires this insight, this vipassana observation and insight. On the other hand, this is not self-conscious observation. It's not observing ourselves thinking about how do I appear to other people, which can lead to a lot of difficulty, let's just say, when we're more concerned about how do we look to other people. This is how are we doing sort of thing. Now, it's important to avoid thinking that our negativities are absolute. Remember impermanence. You don't want to be thinking as you see more and more negativity, I'm bad, nothing can be done about it, I give up. So to put this very succinctly, there are 4 ways of perfecting oneself. First is purify accumulated negative karma from the past. Number 2 is avoid repeating the negative actions of body, speech, and mind that have accumulated the negative karma. 3 is continue positive actions that we have practiced in the past. Don't let them deteriorate. The 4th is develop further positive qualities that we have not yet developed. And to sum this up, keep impermanence in mind. Keep remembering you can change. Your negativities can change too. Your negative karma can be purified. It takes work, and you can do the work. The last is the greater path of accumulation. And this has the term, the four miraculous legs. Here, miraculous actually means hard work. It doesn't mean that things get really easy or somebody else does the work for you or miracles happen. It is the result of hard work that things happen, and it can seem almost like it's miraculous, almost like having a supernatural power. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche compares these four miraculous legs to the four wheels of a car. That if one wheel is missing or flat, the car doesn't go anywhere. He even in Dharma Paths talks about the four miraculous wheels. So the first one is strong motivation and determination. And remember, this is progressive. This is the third part of the path of accumulation. With this strong motivation, nothing keeps you from practicing virtuous actions. Nothing keeps you from meditating and doing virtuous actions in post-meditation. You accumulate merit, and then this takes us to Buddhahood. The second miraculous wheel or leg is diligence, interest, joy in the Dharma and in practice. This leads to effortless, joyful exertion, vigor. You willingly do these things without feeling that it's an imposition or you don't have time or I should be doing this. You just do it, and there is a feeling of joyfulness about it. Third is mindfulness of intention. This means always keeping your intention in mind, your intention to perform virtuous actions, your intention to avoid unvirtuous or unwholesome actions. It means doing what you intended to do instead of being distracted or forgetting to do it. And this is especially in reference to a regular Dharma practice. And finally, being aware and alert so that we can act positively. The last one is one-pointedness. And this is being able to sit in meditation with the mind completely focused on an object without having any thoughts or conceptions. And this is very advanced. And the same thing would be true for mantra repetition, that you can keep your mind focused on a visualization while you are repeating the mantra. Another aspect of this is to use our power of thought and concepts to analyze what is beneficial and what is not beneficial. And we need a basis of shamatha meditation, but again, this is beyond that. Rinpoche says these work together. If a practitioner develops all these 4 points and practices virtuous action, the accomplishments miraculously quickly. So this is why it's called the 4 miraculous legs. Buddhism doesn't discourage thinking, merely excess thinking. So on this path, we use our thoughts in a more constructive way. We turn away from our everyday concerns to some extent. This actually reminds me of a story, an experience that I had. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was teaching a weekend program on the 10 non-virtuous actions. And in one section, he talked about the 4 non-virtuous actions of speech. And he went over them, lying, harsh words, creating disharmony, and then gossip. And he went into them in quite detail. And then when it came to question and answers, the first question was, this eliminates all normal conversation. Well, that's pretty accurate. And this is why we have to turn away from our everyday concerns and be more concerned with virtuous behavior, things that are beneficial to us and things that are harmful to us and other people. We want to escape from samsara, and it is craving that binds us. It is these 4 non-virtuous actions of speech that bind us. And just because everybody else talks this way, it doesn't mean that we have to talk this way. So it's not the objects, the outer objects out there, but it's our attachment to them. We don't have to let go of our mundane life. If we're going to be a spiritual person, it depends on our attitude. It depends on how we see the world. It depends on what's inside. This path is called the path of accumulation because we accumulate merit. And this brings in the idea of a vessel. Sometimes sentient beings are considered vessels, a vessel that can hold the necessary qualities to travel the path. To be a vessel, we need to be open and receptive. We need to be able to contain the Dharma that you might say is poured into us. And this prepares us for the next path, the path of unification. So far, what I've talked about is primarily applicable to both the Shravaka and the Bodhisattva motivation. Bodhisattva motivation would include this being able to and wanting to generate compassion for all living beings and seeing oneself as having Buddha nature within already. That a bodhisattva does not see the journey of leaving samsara and arriving at nirvana. It's more of going home. Before we took refuge, we had an alternative home, some part or some object in samsara. And the real change is that now we see our home as becoming enlightened, the Dharma, reorienting our idea of home.